A grieving widow was meant to remarry the Duke's younger brother until the Duke took his place at the altar. Hello readers, welcome to this channel. Please subscribe and leave a like for us, it means the world to us. Also, share this video with your loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you. As you do so, sit back and relax as we dive into this story. 1. The small village church smelled of old wood and the lingering scent of lilies from last week's funeral. Black crape still hung from a side pew, a quiet shadow in memory of Captain Henry Ward, gone less than 2 years. Today, Captain Ward's widow, Chloe, stood at the altar. She wore a simple ivory gown, soft and plain, instead of the heavy black she was used to. This day was meant to change everything. She was about to marry Julian Harrow, the gentle younger brother of the Duke, who had offered for her to keep her secure and respectable. The air in the church was thick with a strange kind of tension. It wasn't the joyful, excited buzz of a usual wedding. Chloe felt a tremor in her hands, not from passion, but from a deep, cold sense of duty. This marriage was not about love like she had known with Henry. It was about survival. It would keep her from poverty, from the small, damp cottage she rented, and from the quiet shame of being a young widow living alone with no protector or income. The pews were full, packed with curious villagers and county families. Their whispers, like dry leaves rustling, filled the space. The widow remarrying into a ducal family, they murmured, their eyes keen and judging. The organ music swelled, a signal for the groom to enter. Everyone stood, their necks craning, expecting to see Julian's kind, slightly awkward smile. But the heavy oak doors of the church opened, and it was not Julian. Instead, Sebastian Harrow, Duke of Evermere, the older brother, walked down the aisle. He was alone. His formal coat was perfectly tailored, his dark hair neat, but his face was pale, almost grey, yet composed. Julian was nowhere in sight. A wave of public shock rolled through the church. Murmurs rippled, louder this time, like a sudden gust of wind. The vicar, a stout man who rarely faltered, stammered, his words catching in his throat. Chloe felt her heartbeat in her throat, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Her hands, clutched around her small bouquet of white roses, began to tremble. Sebastian reached the altar. He stood beside Chloe, close enough for her to feel the coldness radiating from him. He turned to the vicar and, very quietly but clearly, said, "Vicar, I must speak before the vows can begin." The vicar, still flustered, nodded weakly. Sebastian turned to face the congregation. His voice was steady, calm, even though his eyes held a depth of worry Chloe couldn't quite understand. "My brother, Julian, has left suddenly. He regretfully informed me this morning that he cannot, in good conscience, go through with this wedding." A gasp went through the pews. The whispers grew louder, bolder. Chloe felt a hot flush of humiliation creep up her neck and face. Julian had abandoned her. Again she would be alone, judged and talked about. The twice abandoned widow. Sebastian continued, his voice cutting through the noise. "To spare Mrs. Ward from being publicly jilted and ruined by this unfortunate turn of events, I am prepared to honour the agreement myself. If she consents, I will take my brother's place and marry Mrs. Ward today." Chloe's mind raced. Fury at Julian's cowardice burned in her stomach. Humiliation washed over her in waves, hot and stinging, as every eye in the room stared at her. But then, a cold fear, sharp and immediate, pierced through it all. If this wedding collapsed, she would not just be publicly embarrassed, she would be utterly ruined. There would be no income, no home, no respectable place in society. She would be left to charity, or worse. She remembered the worn black band of her first morning dress, the scent of dust and fading hope in her small cottage. She would be plunged back into that, only worse, because now she would also carry the shame of being left at the altar. The vicar, kind-hearted but unsure, gently said, "We can postpone, Mrs. Ward. Give yourself time." But Chloe could hear the village matron in the front pew, Lady Ainsworth, already whispering to her neighbour, "Postpone? Oh, what a scandal! She'll never find another offer after this." Chloe's late husband's parents, good and kind people, sat a few rows back, looking devastated, their faces showing that they thought she was being rejected, shamed all over again. A small child near the front, oblivious to the high drama, loudly whispered, "Did they bring the wrong brother?" The sharp shush from his mother only made Chloe feel a faint, hysterical urge to laugh bubble up inside her. It was so ridiculous, so utterly absurd. Sebastian, still in front of everyone, turned to Chloe. His dark eyes, usually so distant, seemed to hold a flicker of concern. He spoke very quietly, but clearly enough for her to hear every word. "I will not trap you, Mrs. Ward, but I will not leave you to be torn apart by gossip either. If you can endure my company, I offer you my name in Julian's stead." Chloe took a deep breath. Her future hung on this single word. She had to choose, ruin or this intimidating, cold Duke. She opened her mouth to speak. After a long, painful pause that seemed to stretch into forever, Chloe finally spoke. "Yes," she said. It wasn't a soft, romantic whisper, but a clear, steady voice that surprised even herself. It was the voice of survival, of dignity chosen over public ruin. The vows proceeded, with a stunned, silent congregation as their witness. The ring, meant for Julian, slid onto her finger, cold and heavy. Earlier that morning, Chloe had woken in her tiny rented room. The first light of dawn barely pierced the thin curtains. She looked at the worn black band of her first morning dress, hanging on the wall. It was a reminder of Captain Henry Ward, the man she had loved, the man whose death had left her with debts and no security. 2 years had not been enough to heal the wound, only to numb it. Julian, the Duke's younger brother, had been kind. Soft-spoken, more comfortable with books than people, he had offered to marry her. He knew she didn't love him, not like she had loved Henry. But he promised respect, stability, and a home at Evermere Hall. He had offered to keep her from being forced to live with distant, pitying relatives, dependent on their cold charity. She had liked him. She had trusted him. He was a safe choice. Sebastian, the Duke, was a different man entirely. Julian was friendly, a little clumsy with his words, always lost in thought. Sebastian was distant, intimidating, known throughout the county as the Cold Duke. He rarely smiled, rarely spoke more than was needed, and carried the weight of all responsibilities on his broad shoulders. He was a man made of duty and stone, a stark contrast to Julian's quiet warmth. Now, hours later, Chloe sat opposite Sebastian in the ducal carriage. The wedding was over, they were married, and they could barely look at each other. The carriage rolled silently along the long, winding drive toward Evermere Hall. "Where is Julian?" Chloe demanded, her voice tight. "Did he simply change his mind this morning?" Sebastian's jaw was tight, a muscle jumping in his cheek. He looked out the window. "He left in haste," he said, his voice clipped. "He believed this was for the best. That was all he would say." Clearly, there was more, much more, that he wasn't telling her. Chloe, still raw from the public humiliation but fiercely proud, decided she would not be a meek, grateful bride. I will only stay, Your Grace, under certain conditions. Sebastian finally turned to her, a flicker of surprise in his dark eyes. Conditions? Yes, she said, her chin lifting. First, I must have a private allowance that I control. I will not be a dependent. Second, I will continue my modest charity work with soldiers' widows in the village. It is important to me. And third, she met his gaze. There will be no expectation of immediate intimacy. I will not simply be traded like livestock, a convenient replacement. Sebastian listened, his expression unreadable. He had expected a quiet, grateful widow. He had not expected such clarity, such defiance. After a moment, he nodded slowly. I agree to all of it, Mrs. Harrow, with one condition of my own. In public, we must appear united. You will be shielded from blame. No one will whisper that you forced your way into this marriage. That is my responsibility. It was a strange negotiation, a bargain nobody wanted, but both desperately needed. A brief, very human moment broke through the formal stiffness. Chloe's hands, still holding her wilting bouquet, began to shake. She tucked them into her lap, but Sebastian noticed. Without a word, he pulled out a crisp white handkerchief from his coat pocket and offered it to her. I confess, he said quietly, his gaze still fixed on the passing landscape. I did not sleep at all last night. This was unexpected for us both. It was an awkward admission, but it made him feel less like a villain, less like a cold duke, and more like a man in over his head. The carriage finally rolled to a stop. Evermere Hall loomed before them, vast and imposing, its grey stone walls rising against the darkening sky. As they stepped down, a footman hurried to open the door. Chloe heard the whispers of the staff, like a sudden gust of wind in the grand entrance hall. That's not the brother we were expecting her to marry. She lifted her chin, adjusted the veil that hid her flushed face, and walked into the grand hall as the new duchess, determined not to be pitied. But a burning question remained in her mind. What, exactly, was Sebastian hiding about Julian? 3. Awkwardness settled over Evermere Hall like a thick fog. Days blurred into a strange, formal routine. At breakfast, Chloe and Sebastian sat at opposite ends of a ridiculously long dining table, the silence punctuated only by the clinking of silverware. They rarely found a comfortable topic of conversation. At dinner, the pattern was the same. The staff, perpetually hovering in doorways, exchanged nervous glances, desperate to know if this marriage was a disaster or simply a very quiet sort of tragedy. One afternoon, Chloe, still prone to getting lost in the endless corridors of the vast hall, accidentally walked into the estate office. Sebastian sat hunched over a desk, buried beneath piles of ledgers, his face etched with exhaustion. You run this place like a man fighting a war, not a household, she commented, her voice dry. He didn't even look up at first. Sometimes they're the same thing, Mrs. Harrow, he responded, equally dry, as he scribbled a note. A few days later, they were in the main drawing room, and Chloe's eyes fell upon a particularly hideous portrait of an ancestor. The man had sideburns that defied gravity and a truly unfortunate facial expression. Chloe snorted, then covered her mouth. Sebastian, who had also been glancing at the portrait, let out a surprising, low chuckle. They had accidentally laughed at the same thing. It was a small, shared moment that cracked the ice, if only for a second. Chloe, despite her initial awkwardness, began to notice things. She saw the food wastage in the vast kitchens, the inefficient deliveries from the town's merchants, and the overworked stable hands paired with surprisingly idle footmen. She began to offer quiet suggestions to Mrs. Gable, the sharp-eyed housekeeper, who was wary at first but then grew curious as Chloe's ideas saved money without dismissing any staff. When Sebastian heard of these small, clever adjustments, he was initially irritated that she was interfering, but then he quickly realized the value in her observations. But a deeper, more painful truth was waiting to be found. One day, Chloe entered Sebastian's study to return a book. On a side table, amidst a pile of official documents, lay a crumpled letter. It was from Julian. She hadn't been snooping. It was simply there, half hidden. Her eyes caught a phrase, "Could not in good conscience marry a woman who still wears grief in her eyes." And then, further down, a vague reference to debts and mistakes that would have dragged her down. Hurt, then cold fury, flared inside her. She carried the letter to Sebastian, who was supervising the stable master. "So I was a pity project, Your Grace?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "You took the convenient widow to patch your brother's mess? Is that all I am to either of you?" Sebastian's control finally snapped. He grabbed the letter from her hand, his eyes blazing. "Do you think I enjoyed any of this, Chloe? Do you think I desired to stand at the altar in my brother's place? I stepped in partly out of duty, yes, but mostly because I refused to watch you be humiliated a second time, under the eyes of the entire county." Their argument exploded, raw and honest. "You kept me in the dark," Chloe cried. "You let me believe Julian simply didn't want me. You made me feel like a pawn, traded from one brother to the next. And you think I enjoyed covering his mistakes for years?" Sebastian retorted, his voice tight with his own pain. "Julian has always been irresponsible, always accumulating debts, always making promises he couldn't keep. I've been picking up his pieces since we were boys, and I would not let you become another one of them." Neither of them won the argument. They both walked away wounded, their hearts raw and exposed. But in the heat of their anger, they had seen each other, truly seen each other, for the first time. That night, Chloe couldn't sleep. She sat by her window, listening to the wind howl outside. She overheard a whispered conversation between two maids in the corridor below her room. One maid said, "His Grace has cared for that widow from afar since the funeral, you know. He always stops when he rides past her cottage, always looks for her light in the window." The other maid agreed. "Aye, a pity he didn't marry her first. The captain was a good man, but a duke, well, that's quite a step up." Chloe froze, her heart thumping. Sebastian had stopped by her cottage? He had watched her? She had always believed his actions were purely duty, cold obligation. Now, a confusing, unsettling thought began to form in her mind. Sebastian's feelings might not be pure obligation after all. And that, she realized, complicated everything. 4. A new letter from Julian arrived a few weeks later, posted from a distant coastal town. This letter was different. It wasn't crumpled or brief. It was a long, heartfelt explanation. Julian explained that he had sailed abroad, accepting a position as a tutor for a wealthy merchant's children. He had left to escape his mounting gambling debts and the crushing expectations of his ducal title, which he felt he could never live up to. He admitted, with painful honesty, that he had never loved Chloe in a romantic way, only respected her. He had seen that she still spoke of her late husband, Henry, in the present tense, as if he was still alive. He knew her heart still grieved. He confessed he had been too weak to face her at the altar, knowing his own heart wasn't fully in it, and knowing his mistakes would have eventually dragged her down into his financial mess. He had begged Sebastian to protect her from the scandal of being jilted and from his own growing troubles. Reading the letter, Chloe felt a strange mix of emotions. There was relief that Julian hadn't abandoned her out of simple cruelty, but from a genuine, if misguided, attempt to save her. There was a new kind of guilt, a hot flush of shame, for having misjudged Sebastian's motives so thoroughly, and then a new, quieter grief settled over her. She realized she had been clinging to her widowhood so tightly to the memory of Henry that she had let others make her choices for her. She had been so afraid of losing what she had. She hadn't seen what she might gain. Society, however, had no time for nuance. A poisonous little piece appeared in a county newspaper, disguised as a social column. It subtly implied that Chloe had traded up from the younger brother to the Duke, suggesting Julian had fled because the widow set her sights higher. It used phrases like suspiciously swift substitution at the altar, painting her as ambitious and manipulative. The gossip reached a peak at a small garden party at a neighbour's estate. Chloe, standing near a rosebush, overheard two ladies snipping about her within earshot. "Ambitious," one whispered, "and conveniently grieving." Suddenly, Sebastian was there. He had moved with his usual quiet swiftness. He didn't raise his voice, but his presence commanded attention. "My wife accepted a marriage that salvaged my family's honour more than her own," he stated calmly, but with an iron edge to his voice. "If there is ambition here, ladies, it is mine, not hers. I regret any implication to the contrary." The room went quiet. Chloe felt a tremor run through her. He wasn't just protecting her reputation. He was publicly taking full responsibility, deflecting all blame from her to himself. That evening, back at Evermere Hall, they had a quiet, private confession. Sebastian found Chloe in the library, staring out into the twilight. "I watched you struggle after Henry's death," he admitted, his voice low. "I saw you selling your jewellery quietly, walking to the church in the rain because you couldn't afford a carriage. I saw you trying to be brave. I respected the way you never begged, never dramatized your pain, just kept trying to survive." Chloe, tears in her eyes, finally admitted her own fears. "I said yes at the altar because I was terrified, Sebastian. Terrified of being alone and judged. But now, I'm scared of something different. Scared of caring for someone again and losing them. Scared of letting go of Henry." Sebastian's face softened. He looked at her, not as the new Duchess, but as a woman. Then, a light, human moment broke through the heavy emotions. Sebastian clumsily tried to make tea in his own library, wrestling with the kettle and nearly spilling the hot water. Chloe, trying not to laugh, took over, teasing him gently. "For all your power, Your Grace, you cannot manage a kettle." They shared a small, genuine laugh, and the atmosphere in the room softened, like the fading light outside. The next day, a letter arrived from London. It was from a powerful relative, Sebastian's formidable Aunt Eleanor, who was always concerned with family reputation. She wrote that a formal annulment could still be arranged quietly for the sake of the family name, if both parties agreed. For the first time since Henry's death, Chloe had a real choice. She could walk away from this marriage, from the Duke, without shame. 5. The annulment letter sat on Chloe's dressing table like a silent invitation. It offered her complete freedom. An annulment, a small cottage of her own, a modest allowance, and the chance to start over without the shadow of scandal. Or she could remain as Duchess with a man who both infuriated and, increasingly, steadied her. A life under constant scrutiny, but also one of purpose and security. She took a day alone. She walked back to the village where she had lived with Henry, where her life had unravelled. She passed her old cottage, now rented to another family. She paused outside the small church where Henry's funeral had been held, where she had said yes to Sebastian. She visited the small shop where she had once counted every coin, every penny for bread. She needed to hear her own thoughts, but also the voices that grounded her. She spoke with the vicar's wife, a wise, kind woman. "Security is a blessing, my dear," the woman said gently, "but companionship freely chosen is a miracle." Later, she found a soldier's widow she had been helping with her accounts, Mrs. Evans. "You told me, Your Grace, to stop letting others decide for me," Mrs. Evans said, looking directly into Chloe's eyes. "Do you listen to yourself?" Back at Evermere Hall, Sebastian prepared himself quietly for her departure. He had told his steward, "Whatever she decides, we owe her more than whispers and half-truths." He started drawing up legal papers to ensure her financial safety, a comfortable independence. If she chose the annulment, he would not leave her to struggle again. Chloe returned at dusk, the evening light painting the grey stone of Evermere Hall in soft golds and purples. Instead of going to his study, she asked Sebastian to meet her in the small chapel on the estate, the same simple, private place where his parents had renewed their vows once. She spoke first, her voice clear in the quiet space. "The first time I said yes at an altar, it was to a man I loved and lost. The second time, it was to stop the world from tearing me apart. I would like the third time to be my choice." Clear-eyed and honest. Sebastian, genuinely unsure of her decision, looked at her with a raw vulnerability she had rarely seen. "I will sign the annulment if you wish it, Chloe. My feelings will not change, but your freedom comes first." Her answer was not hesitant. Chloe chose to stay, not out of desperation, but out of a dawning desire. She acknowledged that she had grown to rely on his steadiness, to look for his opinion, to miss him when he was away. She admitted she could not promise him wild, passionate love. Not yet, perhaps not ever, but she could promise loyalty, effort, respect, and the willingness to build something real with him. They stood there, Sebastian and Chloe, exchanging simple promises in the quiet of the little chapel. No audience, no public pressure, just two people choosing each other, almost like renewing vows that finally belonged to them. They left the chapel hand in hand, the shadows long behind them. They teased each other gently about who had been more terrified, him at the altar or her in the silence before her choice. Later, they shared an ordinary, cosy moment in the library. Sebastian read estate papers, the glow of the firelight reflecting in his spectacles. Chloe mended a glove by the fire, a book of poetry resting open on her lap. It wasn't a fairy tale blaze of passion, but a believable, growing warmth. Chloe reflected that she had once been the grieving widow meant to marry the younger brother. But now, she was a woman who had chosen the Duke, not at the altar with everyone watching, but in the quiet, when no one else could decide for her. And whenever someone asked how she came to marry the wrong brother, Chloe only smiled and said, "Oh no, I married the right man. It just took us a while to realize it." Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this emotional journey. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to subscribe, like, comment, and share. Your support helps us continue creating more stories of love, redemption, and second chances that matter. At the end of this video, you'll see a suggestion for another of our romantic stories. Click and discover more beautiful tales of courage and connection. With all our gratitude, Duke's Story.